Hey YouTube, Gordon Miller here. Okay, so let's get to the Mentor series here. This is Mentor series video 1. This should be video 101. So I thought we'd start out the next series here, videos with a mentor focus. I've had the benefit of having some really great mentors over the years, and I really want to use the opportunity here to thank them. Now, most of them are still alive. Some of them are not. And for the ones who are, I'm not going to link you, or not direct you to come take a look at the video. But if you do, then I hope you appreciate the fact, well, just what it meant to me, and what that's been like. So. My first mentor that I'd like to focus on is actually my father. And so my dad was an entrepreneur from an early age. He began by selling encyclopedias door to door as a teenager in the 1950s. Sort of the precursor to the internet. Information and access to it has always been a valuable asset. And so he was very good at getting people interested in buying these books. And he sold for Britannica, which was, I think, the premium brand at the time. And so he did a great job and made a bunch of money. We worked then from selling books to selling lumber, building supplies. In the 1950s, there was a huge boom in residential housing construction. After World War II, there was a huge uptick in the number of houses being built, and people needed lumber supplies to build these houses with. And so it was a great opportunity to contribute to the boom of that. Then my father moved on to owning, he took a $500 loan from his mother and he had a chance to buy this gas station that was over on Route 1, Brook Road, here in Richmond, Virginia, at Interstate 95. And the Route 195 interchange, 95 was a very busy toll road. It's the main conduit north-south from New York to Florida. And there was lots of traffic all the time, and especially during holidays. And he did tow truck work, doing highway recoveries, and he used to cruise up and down the highways, seeing if anybody was broken down and make sure they could help him, because it wasn't like it is today, where you can just take the app and call for help, and they know your GPS location, they come get you. Back then, you had to be patrolling the highways and look for people in distress, and then help them out. So that's what he did. And they sold gas as well and did car repairs and other things like that. And became very successful. And he then paid the loan off with his mother, who then immediately demanded that he give her fair share of the business. Now, my father borrowed money on a loan, and so his only obligation was to return the money with the associated interest, according to what I heard. I think it was like $600 or whatever he returned instead of the 500. So she got a pretty decent return of 20+%. And but she wasn't happy with that. She wanted more, and so she wanted her fair share. Well, unfortunately, my father kind of didn't see it that way, and he knew that he had built the business on his own, that she had no real claim to it. She took him to court and sued him over that and lost. Unfortunately, my grandmother didn't play a major role in my life. After that, I was about age 2 or 3 at the time, and I didn't get a chance to see my grandmother that I'm aware of, and I don't remember her at all. So it's unfortunate. She died when I was about 11 or 12, and didn't even go to the funeral. I think my father went just to make sure she was dead, I think. Dad then, as he began to become successful in business, he began to buy Winnebago motorhomes and rent them out for vacation rental type of experiences, where people are driving from Virginia to California or to Yosemite or to Colorado or Arizona or wherever they were going. And so he made it sort of this rental business out of that. He also had a concession stand at the fair that they did every year. And they would also sell tires and stuff like that to people at the fair. But, they ran a hot dog stand that was very popular and a bunch of other stuff. And so as his success continued to grow, he then got a chance to buy two other gas stations and got rid of the one and bought two. And so he basically took the money he made and saved and the value of the business that was in Northside and moved into the very trendy West End area of Richmond, where he was right in the heart of the West End in two locations. And having two locations, then they began to make twice as much money, as you can imagine. But also, this was the late 60s, early 70s, and mid to late 70s. And the focus was on foreign car repair. Mercedes, BMW, Porsche, all of those were horrible in terms of reliability. They needed almost constant maintenance. And so my father joked that this one 1976 Porsche 911S was solely responsible for paying my entire way through private school, my entire 7 years I was there, because this one poor guy had spent a fortune keeping this black 911 running with the tartan plaid interior. Great option. Car is worth a fortune today if you can find one. And I even bought a 75 911S. I even bought a 75 911S later for about $12,000. And sure enough, it took about $700 a month to keep it running in maintenance. And then that's when I realized that, rather than spending $700 a month in maintenance on a paid-for car, if I wanted to, I could spend $700 a month and get a brand new 911. And that's what I did. But my father continued to work in the service station business. But then in 1975 through 79 was the Jimmy Carter administration, and or 76 through 79. And the oil embargo that came from that and the OPEC problems that arose, gas was scarce. And so there were gas lines, and based on, at least in Virginia, based on your license plate, there were odd and even days. If there was a number in your license plate, or your license plate ended with a number, then if it was a 3, then you were on an odd day. If it was a 4, it was an even day. We had cars that had both, odd and even numbers. We had multiple cars, but we also owned the gas station, so we were allowed to pump our own gas. But it was very difficult to make money during that time because the price had escalated to the point where I remember my father would buy a load of gas, and the gas would be like $80,000, but it was like an 80,000 gallon delivery at $1 a gallon, so it was like $80,000, and so you had to buy it at $1 a gallon. Well, the price had gone up so high that by the time we sold it and made like $88,000, it had made 10%. The price had gone up 15 or 20%. So now you needed another, 15 or 20 grand to afford the next load of gas. So it was very difficult. It was a very difficult time. It was a business model that really was broken on so many levels. And the Carter administration didn't do much. President Jimmy Carter is a great guy, and he's a wonderful humanitarian, but he was a terrible president. And so I won't get into a discussion about who the worst U.S. president is. We'll save that for another video. But my father then realized that Shell Oil Company, who was the manufacturer for the gas that Royal Dutch Shell, that his two locations were related to, the gas stations were independent contractors that paid a fee to Shell to represent their name and things like that. We didn't own the land. We didn't own the rights to anything. And so the problem is that the gas station business had become a real estate play at that point. Shell and Exxon and a bunch of other companies decided that they were going to sell off the land for some of the stations that didn't produce an enormous amount of gas revenue, and they were going to help shore up the stock price and the balance sheet based on that. Unfortunately, both of my father's locations fell into that area because, frankly, the the focus really had been on foreign car repair. My father had owned a 68 Lamborghini Miura, and people would ship their Lamborghinis in, Lamborghini Espada, Lamborghini Miura, the various other Lamborghini 400, the sedan that was so popular. People were starting to ship their Lamborghinis from all over the country into the United States or into Virginia. And then even some people from overseas were going to ship their car from Europe, just to have my father tune it. And it was very difficult because at least my father's Miura had 12 single stack Webers. And so you had to adjust each one. Typically you'd do a triple bank. So you'd have four triple triple throat Webers, and you would tune each of the four independently. But my father had 12 single stacks, and so you had to tune all 12. So any of the ones that had, the 12 single stacks or the four triple stacks, they all had to be tuned, and it was a very difficult thing to do. And he was very good at it. So, the real estate game kind of came due in late 79. And so my father realized that he was going to lose the business. He was going to lose his two locations because he didn't own the land, and they were going to sell it to banks or something like that. And so, he began to figure out what he was going to do next. And he had gone to work with a company that was manufacturing chemicals, and they had created a formula that was designed for the building services and maintenance area. And it wasn't being marketed or sold properly and things like that. My father then decided that he thought he could do a better job of selling this solution and began to build a business around it. And so his company, Atlantic Marketing Incorporated, AMI, built this program, and we ended up putting dealers in place. I was in high school at the time in the early 80s, and we ended up running ads in the Wall Street Journal, and folks would come in and bring their check for $20,000, and they would get a shipment of chemicals and the training and everything to get stuff done, and then they would be able to go out and get this work done. And we actually had gone through and had a contract where the government buildings under this government contract needed to be serviced by somebody. And so we had the service contract, and we basically put the dealers into place to do that. So we had dealers in 38 states and 14 countries, a total of 300 dealers in the network. So multiple dealers per state. And it was a great system. I mean, we had, each of the dealers paid an initial amount of $20,000. So my father used to joke that his commute was all of 3 minutes. He would, put on his bathrobe from the bedroom upstairs and walk downstairs to the living room, where his desk was. He'd check his schedule for the day, and then the doorbell would typically ring at 10:30, and it was FedEx, and there'd be like 4 or 5, document sleeves, and so the envelopes would each have a check for $20,000 in it. So sometimes he'd wake up and it'd be $100,000 day, sometimes a $20,000 or $40,000 day, and sometimes there would be no checks. But over the course of about 2 or 3 years, we put in a total of 300 dealers. The entire program lasted about 7 years, and then we had people beginning to knock off the formula and undermining our contracts and things like that. And I decided that I was going to go back to graduate school. So I decided to go back to graduate school, or not back, but go to graduate school. And that meant that I was no longer going to be managing logistics and shipping and receiving for the company. I was no longer going to be doing manufacturing and production. And so, unfortunately, the people that my father put into place to do that didn't do a great job. We had some difficulties. One shipment got mislabeled, and unfortunately, somebody got hurt. And so they were able to sue the company and recover their damages. The damages were millions of dollars. And unfortunately, that pretty much shut down my father's company. And then my father went on to invent other solutions. He did some pet care products. He got international patents on livestock and other types of animal products, and ice cold water in a solo cup. So anyway, So he continued to work in the pet care industry, working on that formulation with a number of other people, and was working to try to sell that business and some other things. But when he died, he had gone to work for a company it was True Green ChemLawn, working in the he had owned one of the businesses he had owned early on was a company called Total Lawn Care TLC, that allowed him to focus on landscape work in large residential areas, accounts with 3, 4, 5 acres, 10 acres. And he did a great job with that. He had people that worked under him to execute all that. And so in there somewhere, he also worked helping companies close their cold leads accounts. Dad used to go into a company and say, give me all your cold leads. And he's like, okay. And he goes, well, for every one of these I close, I want $500 for each one I close. And they would be like, okay. I mean, they're not going to buy. And so typically Dad would start with a list of about 1,000 people, and his close rate was about 50%. So he would get 500 people. And so, he would make about $250,000, closing leads on that deal for that company. And he'd go on and work for another company and do the same kind of thing. So, it was a great opportunity. I mean, he was really good at what he was doing. I watched what he did as a young child, and I watched how he was in meetings, and I have some audio recordings too of some of those meetings in the early days. And so I really enjoyed watching his technique, and I continued to kind of refine the process and continue to try to make it my own and make it better. And but I love my father very much. My father came from an environment where his father, my grandfather, died when he was 2.5 years old. And unfortunately, my grandmother remarried an alcoholic, abusive, stepfather for my father. And so he didn't have the greatest childhood, that one could possibly have. Not a lot of love and support and things like that. So I always knew my dad loved me, but, he never really, found the way to express it properly. He used to buy me stuff and things like that. But it's one of the reasons that I try to tell my kids every day that I love them very much. And, but my father did the best job he could do. And I realized that when I was about 16, and I'd moved back in with my father after my mother took a job in Florida. They were divorced. And so, I told him one day what a horrible father he was. And he, started, he broke down and cried. And I'd never seen him cry before. So, about anything. And, U.S. Army military police, decorated, veteran. And he's like, look, I did the best job I could, best job I knew how. I'm sorry. And so I remember when I had kids, I lasted about a week after the kids got home, after my oldest son got home. And excuse me. About a week after my oldest son finally came home from the hospital, I called my parents separately, and I was like, look, I'd just like to apologize for anything I ever said or did. This being a parent thing is a hard job, and there's no good user manual. You can read all you want, but unfortunately, there's just no substitute for the firsthand experience. So, it is what it is. And I've tried to be the father that I always wanted to my kids. And I think if you ask my kids, they'll say I'm a pretty good father. But and I'm sure that they'll be a great father too. I mean, they all have that kind of sensibility about them. But, when I do the mentor series here, I wanted to start with the first series to be about my father, because frankly, he made a lot of mistakes in his life, and he never refused to own up to that. I mean, he's like, yep, that was a mistake. I wish I'd never made that mistake, but I made that mistake. And, he's the one who taught me that, if you're caught speeding and the lights are on, behind you, then pull over, that, if there's something, you make a mistake, then you need to man up for it, and you need to own it, and you need to realize that that's the case. And I even did that once. I was way far away from the police officer, and he was actually running after me on foot. And had gone through an area downtown right in front of the police academy, and I was going through a 25-mile-an-hour zone at about 45. And so this one officer, starts running after my car, and I saw him. I was like a block away. And so I actually pulled over and stopped, and the officer, has the whole class of cadets looking at this exchange, and he's running after the car. And he catches up to the car, and he goes, "Why did you stop?" And I was like, "Oh, I stopped because you were chasing me." I mean, and he's like, "Oh, look, get out of here, okay? Just slow it down." And I was like, "Okay, sounds great." So the great thing is that somewhere there's a police officer who was a cadet trainer at the police academy here in Richmond, Virginia, that has the other half of that great story. And I would love to meet the officer again. I was in my orange Datsun 270Z or 240Z. And he comes running, a block and a half after me and all the other cadets watching. So I have no idea what his story was when he got back. So I have no idea what he said the exchange was or how it all went. But he gets the story that he chased down a speeding perpetrator on foot. So it's a great story. But anyway, thank you all very much. I wanted to start out the series with my father. He was sometimes the perfect bad example for me. And thankfully, I've managed to avoid making a lot of mistakes he made. And unfortunately, I've made some mistakes that he did make. And I've made some mistakes of my own, too, because I did stuff that, I worked in areas that my father never worked in. So I had no guide as to what the mistakes to look out for would be in some of those situations. So, but anyway, that's a little bit about my father and how important he was. He is the source of the quotes that I give sometimes, where I asked my father how to make $1 million, and he said, have 1 million, convince 1 million people to give you $1. That's a great answer. And then I asked him, what do you need to start your own business? And he goes, the only two things you need to start a business is you need a FedEx account number and an American Express card. And I've enjoyed my relationship with American Express for 25 years. And, it's a great organization. They've always allowed small business owners to manage their cash needs and things like that. It's been great. FedEx has always delivered things on time. And that on-time delivery record is critical for businesses trying to function in that kind of environment. So, my father had some great advice, and, he didn't give me a lot of advice, but the advice he gave and the example that he led, whether it was a good example or a bad example, was a great example for me to follow. So anyway, thank you all very much. I appreciate you listening to my ramblings about my father.